Hi, my name is Farhan and I'm the Quality Assurance Manager at the Pharmacy Manufacturing Unit, Queen's Hospital, Burton-on-Trent. Here at the Pharmacy Manufacturing Unit, we primarily make medicines that are fit for human use. So the medicines that we make will end up at a wholesaler, and the wholesaler will handle the distribution out to patients. That's kind of where we sit in the medicines supply chain. What I'd like to talk to you a bit about today is medicines approval. So the MHRA has quite a stringent process of approving medicines to prove that they're of the right quality, that they're safe and they're effective for human use. And the topic is immense, so I'm only going to kind of scratch the surface of what's required for a medicine to become approved. So on to the presentation. What I'll try and talk about is firstly a lot of fake news and the common myths, what the MHRA is and why they are, the drug approval process, a little bit on vaccines, what we can do, and then we'll finish off hopefully with some Q&A. Right, so just to start off with a quote, which I think is really pertinent to today and the type of things that we're seeing, and certainly I'm seeing, but probably most of you are seeing as well. So in a time of high fears, uncertainties and unknowns, there's fertile ground for fabrications to flourish and flow. The big risk is that any single falsehood that gains traction can negate significance of a body of true facts. Or what I like to call it is there's lots of rubbish going around that it's hard to do anything about, but I'll try and end on what we might be able to do about it. So fake news and common myths then. So what do we see that's going around that might quite not be true or is completely ludicrous? Stuff like this. So is it 5G? Is the end controlled via microchip? Can we just take salt and vinegar, or can we just take vitamin D, or can we just take dexamethasone or benzalquinone or something like this? Doesn't affect young people, it doesn't matter. We hear stuff like that sometimes. Oh, just take antibiotics or just take this. Is it a conspiracy on a global scale? I've heard things, do pets at home stop the virus? Can you just put lemon or orange peels everywhere? Is that going to stop the virus? So there's a lot of misinformation, speculation, false information, and outright ludicrous information that's out there, which can be really hard to tackle and combat. But quite often, if we do try and tackle and combat it, doesn't actually make too much difference and probably gives people a bit more chance to kind of push on with the misinformation instead of kind of stop spreading it. So this is where kind of the MHRA comes in, and this is where a lot of so we have 2 licenses with the MHRA. So the MHRA is the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. They're the regulators of medicines in the UK. They fall under the Department of Health government arm, and then they've got powers in terms of criminal law as well. So I'll try and keep it brief, and I will try not to be too boring and get into the nitty-gritty, but the purpose of the MHRA is to regulate any medicine, medical devices and blood components for transfusion in the UK. So that does include vaccines, as it includes anything else that's a medicine that you'll see in the pharmacy on the shelf with a license number on it as well. So they're concerned about 3 things. So before any medicine can be sold to market, these are the 3 triggers that the MHRA look for. Is it safe? Is the quality appropriate to the medicine that's been taken? And is it effective? Does it do what they say it's going to do? So if it doesn't meet those 3 things, then it won't get a product license. It won't get approved for use. But a different question that sometimes gets posed is, what if medicines cause harm to people? Which is quite a good question, and it's quite hard sometimes to answer, because there's an element of risk, isn't there? And there's an element with risk with everything. So yes, it can meet safety, quality and efficacy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it won't cause any harm at all. So if I give a kind of an example, obviously medication for cancer is quite well known about, and some of the side effects are quite well known about as well. So stuff like hair loss, for example, or weakness and feeling really weak throughout the day, vomiting and sickness a lot of people get. There's side effects that come with most medicines. If you look at the packet, things like headaches or dizziness, or it might cause drowsiness, or do not drive whilst taking, or do not take with alcohol. So the purpose of the medicine obviously is to provide a treatment or a cure or a diagnosis. However, it's based on risk. So if it means that taking this medicine will provide a positive outcome, then it can get approved. So it's just like medications for cancer. If it is actually going to take steps to either prolong life or cure the cancer, get rid of it completely, or treat it, it can be approved regardless that there might be a side effect. But in essence, that's a good thing. Otherwise, we wouldn't actually have any medicine to do anything, because as soon as it's got a little side effect that could be harmful, then that's where the stop button will be pressed. So it's important to understand that safety, quality and efficacy are there, and it has to actually have some sort of treatment, diagnosis. It has to do something positive. It has to be better than the nothing or what's already there. Otherwise, it won't be approved. So, all new medicines are assessed rigorously before they can be sold in the UK, and the MHRA continues to monitor the safety once they're licensed. So it's not a case of once it's licensed, that's fine. They're monitored. If there's a potential issue with a medicine or a medical device, they'll take action. So the action they take is dependent on what the issue is. And the way they do it is really through a recalls and alert system. So if, for example, there's a specific batch of medicine that's contaminated, that will get recalled, and it will be a class 1 recall, danger to public health. All the product has to be recalled and quarantined within 24 hours. Or it can just be kind of a class 4 caution in use. So that means, for example, the patient information leaflet might have a small spelling error on it. Most people won't notice. What they'll do is they'll put a caution in use out, informing pharmacies, we've got a medicine, it's safe to take for what it's supposed to be taken for. There's a small error on the patient information leaflet that's not going to affect the patient or the medicine. You know about it, but you don't actually need to stop people from taking it. So they've got lots of tools in the bag to be able to do that. The MHRA work closely with other regulators like the EMA. Obviously, Brexit's been the hot topic recently. So prior to January, it was pretty much a European whole thing, medicine freely flowing through the European Union. There were mutual recognition agreements in place to make sure that anything that was fine in the UK was fine in the rest of the EU, and the same vice versa. And actually, for the rest of this year, it will stay the same as part of the post-Brexit kind of deals and stuff they've done. And then finally, what I want to make you aware of, which hopefully most of you already know about, is the yellow card scheme. So the yellow card scheme, and that's a website where you can just Google yellow card if you want to know more about it. And that's what the MHRA have in place so that anyone can report any medicine. So it doesn't matter if that's a patient, a clinician, a manufacturer, a distributor. If they see something that they think is clearly wrong, they report using this. The MHRA investigates, and then there's an outcome that could be recall, could be nothing, could be something. It's one of those. All right. So licensing then. So licensing is a really vast topic in itself. I mentioned that we at Burton have 2 licenses. One of the licenses that, well, actually we've got 3 licenses, I guess, looking at that list now. The top license, MIA, Manufacturers Importers Authorization. So we have one of them. So in order to manufacture any licensed medicine or manufacture any clinical trial or what you call investigational medicinal product, you need either an MIA or an MIA IMP. So we've got an MIA because we make some licensed products, and there's a lot of conditions that go along with having an MIA. So you have to have an inspection where the MHRA will look at your facility. Is the facility appropriate for the type of medicine you're manufacturing? Then look at your people. Have you got the correctly skilled people for what you're trying to make? They'll look at your equipment and in terms of your facility, what equipment you've got in there. So if you're making things, for example, if you're like we do, if we're filling liquid into bottles and capping it, well, are our filling lines and capping lines appropriate for the type of medicines that we're filling and capping? Can we correctly sterilize something if we need to sterilize it? So they'll look at all these things. They'll also really heavily look at all the documentation and audit trail If they're happy, they'll say, well, here you go, here's a license. And if they're not happy, you just don't get a license, you can't make medicine. It's as simple as that. So other licenses are wholesaler dealers authorization. So that's if you're actually distributing medicine. So if you're a wholesaler, you're not making it yourself, but you're taking it in to sell on, or you're taking it in and you're distributing it to pharmacies. Well, you need a WDA, you need a license to be able to do that. So the whole supply chain actually gets controlled by the MHRA, because activities involving medicines, until they hit the shelf in a pharmacy or in a supermarket, everything before that has required a license, all the way from making the active ingredients and raw materials through to the final product, through to distribution and supply. Everything is licensed, and MHRA does have the power to revoke or suspend licenses as they see fit. The other licenses that we have are Home Office license. If you deal with any controlled drugs, that's a separate arm of the government. And then all pharmacies, including hospital pharmacies, have to have a license from the General Pharmaceutical Council. All right, so this is the type of thing that the MHRA will do if they've seen something that they're not happy with. So homeopathic medicines are really big, aren't they, especially with COVID. Just take some, I don't know, lemon juice or honey, or this will be a cure for everything. Just take these vitamins. It's bigger in America probably than it is here, but homeopathic medicines can be useful. There's no denying that. They work for some people. There's no denying that. What they don't tend to have is the huge body of research and clinical trials that statistically prove that they work in the general population. What that means is they might work for 3, 4, 5 or 6 people, but actually if you give it to person 8, 9 and 10, it might be really deadly for them. That's not the type of medicine that you want in wide circulation. So what the MHRA have in place is they've got a system where if anyone is advertising or claiming to have something that's a medicine that either isn't licensed or doesn't do what they're saying it does, they've got a blue guide for that. So they'll say, well, you've got a cease and desist. They'll get a fine. They can take more action. It usually tends to stop at a fine and tell them to take the advert and stuff down. If it gets worse, it can end up in a criminal court. So this was one that happened in March 2020, around about when the first lockdown started. So I'll probably named and shamed a company, but this is public information, so I hope I'm not doing anything wrong. It's been recorded as well, I think. So these guys have said there's a homeopathic coronavirus product which is advertised that claims to treat or prevent disease. MHRA said no, take it down, here's a fine, can't do it. So the blue guide, which I've linked at the bottom, is about advertising and promotion of medicines. It's a 116-page document. It literally, in kind of UK national law, it's stipulated exactly what you can and can't advertise. So even us as a manufacturer, we're not allowed to advertise any of the products that we make. If we do, we're just going to hit with a hefty fine from the MHRA, and then we'll have to stop at the advertisement as well. Right, so the drug approval process. So usually we link these two together, clinical trials and drug approval. Actually, even though they're linked, there's more to drug approval than just clinical trial. But what is a clinical trial? Well, it compares the effects of one treatment with another, or, especially in the case of COVID, which is fairly new, the effects of no treatment with a treatment. So it might use patients, healthy people, it might use a mixture of both. And there are ways to test in a controlled manner if a medicine works or not. So to link it with COVID-19, the kind of statements that I hear people saying are, how are vaccines already available? It's barely been a year. Or how can we know what the longer term effects are? Because it's only been a year. How can it have been fully tested? It's only been a year. They're all good questions, I think. But to be able to answer them, I think we need a bit more knowledge around clinical trials. So the approval process can take kind of 10 to 15 years typically. Sometimes quicker, sometimes shorter. So it can take 1 year and it can take 20 years. It generally depends on things like the type of disease. If you've got a really, really rare type of cancer, for example, it's going to be really hard to push that type of trial along because you just don't have the number of people to be able to test on. And there's a lot of controls that actually have to be put into place before you can actually initiate the tests. The type of treatment available. So if you're expecting the treatment to be something like, I don't know, a dialysis, or someone has to be in hospital for a week, it's going to be hard to get a lot of people in a short amount of time. The type of trial it is, I won't go into types of trials because it will take me probably an hour itself. the number of patients that you need. So again, if it's a really rare type of disease, you're not going to get many patients, but you need a lot of patient data as part of your trial write-up. And then the follow-up period, you need to monitor what's happening afterwards. Also any problems with the new treatment that need to be mopped up. And then after all that, you also need to submit it as an application and say how you're going to test the medicine, how you're going to do an overview of it before it gets submitted. So that's why it can take a long time. So if we link that back to COVID, actually, the type of disease, well, we know it's a virus. The type of treatment, well, we can try anything under the sun, really. And unfortunately, it spread really fast. Actually, from a medicines approval point of view, that was a kind of a blessing in disguise, because it meant that there were always people available to do the trial on. The type of trial, well, everyone was able to do it. Some people will be trialing tablets, some people will be trialing an injection, some people will be trying something else. Well, anything that's classed as a medicine, you could put a case forward that you want to do a clinical trial on it. Massive cohort of patients, because all over the world people were undergoing trials, and the monitoring period was also easier for that reason. So if I look at a typical clinical trial, phase 1, really small amount of people after it's been approved, you're just saying, can it safely be used? It's very, very, very rare that phase 1 is done in anything except for a healthy person, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to give a medicine that might or might not work to someone who's really ill, because if it doesn't work, it can be really debilitating for them. But before phase 1 even starts, there's a lot of lab tests, sometimes animal tests that are done beforehand. So phase 2, you started to open it out to a lot of people. You might actually use it in some of the unhealthy people at this point. Phase 3, it says 1 to 3,000 participants. I think for the COVID vaccines, about 35 to 50,000 participants were involved in phase 3 in the space of probably 6 months. So that again is freely published data. And here you can really see what is happening. Is it working in these 30,000 people who have COVID versus these 30,000 people who also have COVID but have not taken the medicine? And it's really easy to get a yes or no when you're talking about 30,000, 50,000 people, because if, for example, 40 out of 50,000 people, it's done something in that's positive, whereas the people who've had nothing, only 25,000 people have had something positive, well, you know you've got a significant increase in the outcome there, or a positive increase in the outcome there. And then finally, phase 4 is what we call in use. So phase 4 is what's happening right now, if we're linking that back to COVID, because that's telling us that long term it's working, or long term it's not working, pull the medicine. But I think thankfully long term it's working. Finally, before any clinical trials for medicines can start, you need approval from the MHRA, or actually would have been the EMA last year when this was going on, or the European Medicines Agency. But the clinical trial application before these phases start, it is really lengthy. Quite often it gets turned back by the regulators to request for more information. So they'll request things like, are you sure the patient population you want to use it in is appropriate? And if the answer is no, then so I'll go back and rethink who you're going to actually let it be injected into. And types of things that you'd find in phase 4, just like we found for the COVID vaccine, is people with really severe nut allergies, for example, they're being asked to not take it now. But that would have been really hard in phase 1, 2 and 3, because they probably would have been excluded because they've got a condition that would mean that you wouldn't want to trial something in them. Right, vaccines. So I'm not an expert on vaccines, but I'll just brush over it. So really what they do is they teach your immune system how to create antibodies, and the antibodies protect your body from diseases. Your body never forgets these antibodies. Your immune system will always know how to produce them once they've produced them once, which means it can protect you for a long time. It's also really safe to do it through vaccination rather than actually catching the disease and letting your body fight it off naturally, because catching it naturally might come to an outcome where actually your body can't fight it off. So it's really important to protect us. Since we've introduced vaccines, things like smallpox, polio, tetanus that used to kill or disable millions of people, you don't really see anymore. Things like measles and diphtheria have been almost eradicated as well. Other things about vaccines, what you hear the word herd immunity kind of bandied around. What it means is if enough people are vaccinated, usually tends to be kind of over 90%, it's really hard for that disease to spread to those people who actually can't physically have the vaccine because of a medical condition or a weakened immune system. You hear a lot of rubbish about ingredients, but actually the main ingredient of any vaccine is usually a small amount of the bacteria or virus, and it's usually weakened or destroyed first, and that's just to help your body to understand what it is, see it's a foreign body before it can destroy it. Usually the side effect that most people get, that I got when I had my COVID vaccine, was that you get kind of a bit of swelling and a little bit sore on the injection site. So what can we do? First of all, follow guidance. Everyone's saying it, stay at home, keep your distance, wash your hands. If you've got high temperature cough, loss of or change to sense or smell or taste, get tested and stay at home till you get a negative result. But about the misinformation that I talked about right at the start of the presentation, what you want to be doing is, if you don't know enough about what they're saying, or if you think they're spouting rubbish but you're not sure, point them to the right people. Have a quiet conversation with them. Quite often it's about people's concerns. They'll have heard something from someone, or they've seen something on Facebook which is brewing in their mind. Actually, if you can sit down and have that conversation with them, you might actually be able to understand where it's coming from. Try not to engage in the heated debates either at work or online, because that's where feelings get involved. We all know people that have either been affected by or worse to COVID. It can get really heated sometimes, but giving a public audience to someone who's a conspiracy theorist is probably the best thing you can do for them, because it lets everyone see and hear and speculate about. Not really helpful to anyone, so be aware of that. It's appropriate to politely provide your own perspective. So my perspective is, if more people are vaccinated, just means that less people can potentially catch it, means that normal life can get on sooner, and I really want a holiday. And remember why this is really important. So I think most of the countries banded together really well. The NHS especially has done a gargantuan job, amazing job at this. But it's really important to actually reduce the infection and death rate and get back to some kind of normality. And then finally, this one I always get asked this, is which is the best vaccine to get? And we're lucky that we live in the UK where there's probably 3 licensed vaccines that you can get. But my answer hasn't changed throughout when someone asked me this last month and the month before. It's the one you're offered. So like I was talking about in previous slides, the MHRA have got really robust mechanisms in place to make sure that the appropriate level of testing and stuff has been done. But if the vaccine wasn't safe, or they found it wasn't safe in use, they would have pulled it. And really, for me, that's where the discussion ends. Thank you for listening. That's kind of the end of the presentation. If I was to do a quick summary, what I'd say is we're very lucky in this country to have a regulatory in the MHRA that's quite stringent in terms of their process for approving medicines for use. Quite often they'll ask for RFIs or requests for information if there's any questions that they have about the clinical trial process or the testing of the medicines or any side effects and things like that, and they'll be very quick to pull any medicine that they think isn't fit for use after it's been actually put onto the market as well. So if I was going to say kind of a few closing words about talking to staff or even friends that you have with concerns about vaccine, one thing is just to keep the conversation open. You don't really want to shut the conversation down if they're not sure whether they're going to have the vaccine, or if they're saying things that you don't believe to be true. Really, it's just about keeping the dialogue going and making sure there's always a route for them to come back, really to hear the truthful information about vaccines and what goes into them. So thanks for listening, and hopefully I'll add an information source so you can look into it if you need to.